Johnstown is most famous for the Great Flood of 1889, the worst flood to hit the country in the 19th century, resulting in the greatest loss of civilian lives in the U.S. at that time, an estimated 2,200 lives. But before the flood, it was renowned for producing steel rail that supplied the expanding transcontinental railway. The city of Johnstown had been transformed from a quiet canal village to one of the nation's leading suppliers of steel when the railroad replaced canal boats. It was a bustling, industrial, blue-collar city with a large immigrant population. The city of Johnstown was built on a floodplain in the valley of the Allegheny Mountains. 14 miles up the mountainside was the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, an exclusive private summer resort with a lake for sport fishing and boating. But the lake was poorly maintained. Damaged sluice pipes were never replaced, the spillways were blocked by fish netting, and as a result, there was no spillway or outlet for rising water. On Decoration Day, May 30th, 1889, it was a brilliant day. Big holiday parade that people from miles around attended. Light rain started around 4 in the afternoon, and by 11 o'clock that night it turned into a storm, the worst downpour ever recorded in western Pennsylvania. Then comes the storm of the century. 2 major storm fronts converged over Johnstown. There had already been over 100 days of rain that year, and the rivers were already running high. Plus, there was snow melt from a heavy snow in April. Meanwhile, the mountain lake is swelling, cresting, and the dam that held back 20 million tons of water was giving way. The dam breached around 2:55 p.m. on May 31st. That 20,000 tons of water burst the dam and became a wave traveling at speeds of 40 miles per hour and reaching a height of 60 feet as it slammed into Johnstown, picking up everything in its path: the trees, livestock, boulders, train cars, people, wreckage from structures. The telegraph lines were pulled into the flood, and the message didn't get to Johnstown until 2:45, so the people of the town didn't receive the warnings in time and were not prepared for the flood that washed away their homes and many of the town's buildings. Looking at the path of the flood, in a short 60 minutes, the wave progressed down the mountainside, crushing hill towns and finally sweeping into Johnstown, leveling the city. In red is the dam, and South Fork was the first town below the dam where the first telegraph depot went down. Then it continued to the railroad viaduct, stopped for roughly 8 minutes, where it gathered enough hydraulic force before the viaduct collapsed and that volume of water became a tidal wave. In that wave were trees, boulders, livestock, everything the water picked up in its path down the mountain. It progressed to East Conemaugh, one of the larger and more populated hillside towns, on to Woodvale, where the location of the Cambria Iron Works was. Boilers exploded, there were plumes of black smoke, and miles of barbed wire became entangled with the rest of the debris in the floodwater. It then continued on to Johnstown, into the city, where the stone bridge across the Conemaugh River that held back debris and stopped the force of the flood. Here, the river caught fire, and all those people that were swept downriver were caught in the debris and met their end in what was essentially a cauldron or a bonfire, which burned for 3 days. It's thought to have been fueled by oil spilled from a tanker car or live coals from a stove. For my research, I was granted access to the archive room at the Flood Museum, where I had the privilege of handling artifacts like dolls, wire-rimmed glasses, letters, gloves, a lot of personal items. And then the information about the people in the book I gathered from the morgue book, which I had access to at the Flood Memorial site. And here, victims were described by number. They were listed by number and morgue. And they were described by their approximate age, gender, physical features, jewelry, contents in their pockets, what they were wearing. And then these morgue descriptions were copied as tags placed on the coffin lid of plain pine coffins set up in makeshift morgues, which were schoolhouses, taverns, churches. The book begins and ends at the Grandview Cemetery in Johnstown, where there is a plot of unmarked stones, one for each of the 777 unidentified victims. It's called the Plot of the Unknowns. This is the cemetery where my family is buried, and when I visit my family's grave sites, I always walk to the Plot of the Unknowns, and I'm always very moved by the site. The first poem is At the Plot of the Unknowns. I belong to a family of grave tenders. We arrive with grass shears, watering cans, season upon season. A seashell placed on a neighboring stone, small plastic farm animal on the next, say, you are not forgotten. After tamping the annuals, I kneel back, conjure my mother. If there is an after, I hope she is pleased with these small gestures. The day is radiant. Mica and quartz glisten monuments along the path to the plot of the unknown drown, whose identical marble stones rise from the ground in narrow rows like sheaves of some strange crop. Their blank faces marked only by weather, names writ in water. Dressmaker, scullery maid, drifter, carpenter, millwright, mother, the children whose dreams scatter in the grass, you are not forgotten. I lean my full weight on one stone, knowing in my own bones there is a story here, and under the next, and the next. The earth is beginning to warm, an elusive wood thrush flutes, crocuses open to the light. WATERMARK is a book of persona poems in the voices of flood victims, mainly those victims who were never identified, and also of people who played a role in the flood, like railroad engineer John Hess, the telegraphers along the railway, Clara Barton, whose Red Cross workers played a major role in relief and restoration. For the unidentified victims, I borrowed an excerpt from the morgue description to create a figure based on that description. These are imagined voices drawn from the records of real people who each tell a personal account of the flood. The next poem is in the imagined voice of a young flood victim, the stargazer. The stargazer. Morgue entry. Male, age 14, light complexion, regular features, short gray knee breeches, large aquiline nose, blue eyes, fine, intelligent, and pleasing look. No shoes or stockings. The studs of Orion's belt, bright enough this clear, cold night to trace, connecting the stars from buckle to sword, the nebula midway down, a misty globe of young stars, right at the tip of my finger. At tonight's library lecture, the image of a 60-minute exposure, imagine, showed stars too faint to be seen from Earth, light years away, the lecturer said. Light years. In that moment, my chair lost its hold on the floorboards, everything in the hall blurred, and I felt lifted up and out of my own skin, spun like a human nebula. I can't even describe the feeling, but walking home, I was still a little wobbly, Like that time I stole a couple of swigs from Pop's bottle. Pop tells me to get my head out of the clouds, set my sights on the steel industry, building railroads, cities. The possibilities, he keeps saying, are endless. What ignites me could not be farther from what he goes on about. His life's given over to what's dug from the earth, iron ore and coal lodged beneath these mountains. But far up, above the chimneys and smokestack fumes, whirling like chalk dust, are whole entire worlds we don't even know. Endless worlds. In the late 1800s, when the railroad was established as the main means of transporting people and goods, there were telegraphers at depots along the tracks who supplied passing engineers with information about how the trains were running and also sent messages down the line about the condition of the tracks and any danger in the area, in this case, the breach of the South Fork Dam. Emma Ehrenfeld was the telegrapher at the South Fork Depot, one of the first hill towns to be hit by the flood. This next poem, in Emma's voice, is Keeping an Eye on the River. The river's already swollen at 7 a.m. when I climb the depot tower stairs, drenched as a river rat. The same showers that soothed me to sleep turned fierce. A downpour the railroad men said they'd never seen the likes of. Engine 1165 idles on the south siding. No going on with washouts on the tracks east and west of South Fork. Conductor and his engineer pace in and out of my office, awaiting dispatch orders, watching the weather, the rising river, nearly out of its banks by noon. I tend to my sounder, anxious for a clear circuit, the familiar clicks, and keep the brewer on the flame, strong black coffee by the potful. Not one of us mentions the dam, its flaws, the likelihood of a breach. Discourse enough, the drumming rain, the back and forth thumping of gumboots. Railroad engineer John Hess is one of the heroes of the flood. When the dam broke and the floodwater started, he was just south of the town of East Conemaugh. He threw his engine into reverse, pulled his whistle, and tied it down, and ended up saving many lives. The next poem is On Hearing John Hess's Whistle. Emma Ehrenfeld, telegrapher, South Fork Tower, 3:08 p.m., May 31st, 1889. Any operator worth her salt can read a train whistle by ear. The pitch, the tune, the duration declares which conductor, what message, the urgency. At the first of John Hess's 5 sharp whistle blasts, we know in our very bodies that danger is upon us. The conductor and I spring in unison from our chairs, me without even grabbing my hat, then fly at a great lick down the tower stairs. One glance up the hillside reveals a rick-rack wall of timber, rooftops, Lord knows what else, gathering up everything in its path. I bolt across 4 sets of tracks and up the stairs of the coal tipple. The water's roar joined with that mournful whistle shriek. My ears still ring with it. The dam that threatened year after year has failed in spectacular fashion. 4 more blasts before Hess ties down his whistle, a scream anyone within earshot can decipher. Within minutes, the wave sweeps away the entire tower. I look away when it goes under. Later, I find among the debris my telegraph key, that old vacuum brewer, and my faithful depot clock, once affixed atop the tower like a full moon. Its hand stopped cold at 3:08. Next is The Scullery Maid, Morgue entry. Female, age 35 to 40, fair complexion, large nose, tall and strangely built. Working woman, hands creased, evidently worked about a stove or cooking. When sails appeared like seraphim on the mountain lake, gliding against the dark pine ridge, I let myself be lifted into that vision. In between basting and boiling, scouring and mopping, I'd lean against the back porch rail of the St. Charles Hotel and gaze up to the hills. Imagine myself as one of those fancy clubhouse ladies with starched petticoats, a smart bonnet trimmed with bows and flowers, a wide silk ribbon tied beneath my chin. My hands would be smooth as the marble virgins at St. John's, not these rough, puckered mitts that know only boil, pluck, and scrub day in and out. I'd be handed into a boat fitted with wings, white wings, stretched out like a seabird, and float right off the mountain. Oh, such fantasies, until old Mr. Fitzharris hollers on the regular to get back to the kitchen. By 11 that morning, water in the streets already head high. No time to take up the rugs. I was swept up the stairs with all creation, jamming and shouting, "The torrent, the failed dam!" When the wave crashed the roof, hurled me back down and down, claimed me, dreams and all. They found me in the cellar 2 days later, floating among jars of peaches and beans, my cotton underskirt flared about my body. The carpenter. Morgue entry. Male, age 45, height 6 feet, very powerful man, sandy hair, bullet head, massive jaws. On his right arm was tattooed a ballet dancer with a tambourine in her hand, knees calloused as though he worked at measuring. Expression indicated Irish nativity. My life was hoist, measure, pound, making houses sturdy as myself, houses for the big bugs along Washington Street, the jewelers and bankers, nothing but the best for that breed, braced framing, concrete slabs, walls plumb as plumb is plumb. So much a body reveals. My roughed-up knees read measure. Feet bare and pocked announced hobnail shoes, those shoes swallowed up by the flux and filth. My jaw square as a four-walled room. Beale figured it right. My hands were indeed of fighters. Any man, hey, I could thump him flat as a thick-shanked nail. But this torrent, a royal of saw logs, brick, axles, cattle, and swine, Christ amighty, the whole hillside come down upon us like all wrath. They found me wedged in a stone foundation of a house I set right. For all my mass, I was no match for that water's brawn, its gnarled fist. The dressmaker. Morgue entry. Foot of female. High button shoe. Black merino stocking. Decoration day, the rain had at last abated. The washed air fairly glistened off drum rims, and flags flew, vivid blues and reds, along Main, where a multitude from far away as Altoona and Ebensburg came by special trains. Stores closed, school children released, cheers and laughter trilled with piccolos, the whole town up-tempo as the parade advanced. Oh, it was grand, and I, spruced out in my best shirt-waist, the indigo gingham whose sleeves I yoked and edged with ruffles. Nothing so fine as the better ladies' dresses I sewed, rustling folds of silk, velvet cloaks fit for the opera house, but special enough for holidays. Glancing from below my skirt hem, the fancy tips of my new kid-leather side-button boots, a month's worth of sewing wages, stored in their leatherette box, rubbed with Vaseline year after each wear, and spared for occasions such as this. I love that neat heel click on the pavement, Sunday walks through the park, their sharp tap across the library's chestnut planks. That sound grounded me to the earth, announced my existence in a crowd, and bespoke an elegance I would otherwise never own. Oh, had I been left all of a piece, of all the possessions on my person that might have distinguished me from the other morgue remains, thimble, locket, door key, button hook, that they should have found only my high button boot, just the one, a scrap of black wool stocking limp over the top, my foot cushioned there within its kid-lined recess. The bodies of the flood victims were placed in plain pine coffins and laid out in any structure that still had walls and a roof. Survivors looking for their loved ones would come to these makeshift morgues and walk the aisles, reading a tag taken from the morgue book describing the body or the remains left inside. If the description matched their loved one, the lid was moved aside for identification. The Millville Schoolhouse turned morgue was one of the few buildings remaining on its foundation after the flood. Dear lady, pass this way with me. Step carefully down the rows of coffined victims, some maimed or burnt. Shh, only his face will show. We'll read the tag on each box lid, which tells what may distinguish your husband from another chap. Old scar, a ring, a mustache. Now bear in mind that might be all to signify the person who lies within a rough pine box, what's left past recognition. This school once hummed with minds abrim, John Keats and long division. Still on the chalkboard rests the dust of rhyme scheme, decimal precision. Now bodies stretch across the desks, at peace or fair disfigured, swept down river, pried from debris, townsfolk fixed in rigor. Benumbed by such a scene, take heart, just say, what clothes, what weight, for I'm the one who lays them out. I'll know your man by sight. Just now you blanch by this next box, so cruel your utmost fear. Poor woman, take my handkerchief. Let's get you some fresh air. The errant husband. Morgue entry. Male, age 45, weight 180, height 5 feet 10 inches, white bunch of keys, $1.13 loose, white bone-handled knife. I shouldn't have left you home by yourself, water in the street, nearly reaching our kitchen window. The gaslight sputtering, but darling, so little money. An end of the month, rent, the gas bill, our anniversary. You must understand, third turn and an extra shift, and you still dreaming. If only I'd known the mill would send us, every last man, back home, and I, God, in my unnerved state, stopped by the saloon, just one whiskey to steady me, just the one. Then there was old Hooper outside calling, help me get this horse hitched. That horse, suddenly a swirl in the flooded street, jackknifing Hoop's buggy, all a frenzy. Caught beneath those buggy wheels, it had nothing to do with the drink. All the wreckage in the water knocked me under, and now your measured footfall near this shoddy casket that you somehow survived, and now come looking for me in this God-forsaken place, a schoolhouse defiled, and children coffined here too. In spite of all my folly, you come, beyond bearing even in this nether state. Pass me by now, dear Anna, for they could not loosen the grimace from my face. You'll never know the last word on my lips was your name. Clara Barton was the founder of the American Red Cross. She makes several appearances in the book. She was the main force behind the city's reconstruction and relief to the citizens. She was 67 years old at the time, very senior in the late 1800s. She was a small woman, all of 5 feet tall, but in personality full of her own authority, and one of the flood heroes. Clara Barton reports from the field. Johnstown, Pennsylvania, September 9th, 1889. Half my life has been spent in motion, and so it is fitting I conduct my field work from this abandoned boxcar. What do I need beyond a wooden crate for a desk, milking stool for a chair, my spine a sufficient backrest? 3 months now since the Great Flood, and already we've built housing for scores of homeless. Running water, both cold and hot. No person in need of clothing or food is left empty-handed. Thanks to my nurses, the typhus is contained. If only we could heal broken spirits. I trust time will do its best work there. Never have I been prouder to see the Red Cross banners flying above our white tents. General Hastings has proved a worthy partner. I recall our first meeting in June when, ankle-deep in muck, hatless, doubtless disheveled, I stood surveying the devastation when he swung down from his horse and offered his hand. "Dear woman, may I assist you?" I had to hide my smile. At the end of a long day, I prize the night's silence, let the visions of wreckage, the bewildered faces fall away. I stretch out on a cot narrow as myself and feel the fatigue in these old limbs, glad for clean bedding and a woolen blanket this rainy night. I shall not leave until my work here is finished. Daily the town rebuilds, home by home, shop by shop. Smoke from the Gautier steelworks will rise again, like Lazarus, having nothing whatever to do with miracles. John Hess's Last Day, Conemaugh, 1906. The river still rises in my dreams, and we fly down the tracks just ahead of the wave that engulfed the city. I race my engine breakneck, sounding that long whistle all the way, then startle awake, sweated and elated. Somehow my crew survived. My engine was later restored. I never would have believed it possible after seeing her tumbled on her side with the other cars like a bunch of dead cows. After 17 years, I close my eyes to this sick room and clear as my own wife's face, remember swinging up to the cab next to the fireman, checking the gauges and valves, seeing a good fire in the box, the gleam of the steel rail ahead. I was one with that engine, my hand on the throttle, feeling the shudder of power beneath me, steaming her down the line. Now I hear a distant train's moan and chuff. If only I could rise from this bed, walk to the window, watch the white blast of steam, the progress of engine, coach, caboose, the wind around the mountain bend. We'll close where we started. at Grandview Cemetery in 1939 on the 50th anniversary of the flood. Alma Hall was one of the few buildings spared after the flood. There were 264 people who took refuge in Alma Hall the day of the flood. 2 babies were born there that night. This poem is in the imagined voice of one of them, who returns on her 50th birthday to observe the anniversary. Watermark. I washed into the world on the sodden mattress that floated my pregnant mother into the second-story window of Alma Hall. In the pitch blackness of that shivering night, I am told the contractions came on full force, her screams of pain likely drowned out by the shouts and sobs of 200-some terrified and injured in that same room, by the wind's sharp howl, the incessant crash and splinter of buildings, bodies, God knows what, outside. Standing here now in front of Alma Hall, I gaze up to the second-floor watermark, the elliptical arches like raised eyebrows, and conjure some primal memory of being delivered from one floating world into another by a doctor with 3 broken ribs, while 18 feet of water sloshed at the sill. I am told that the Presbyterian church steeple split the wave in 2, sending the wall of water to either side of the hall, sparing all but one of those sheltered inside. Over the years, I have pieced together what I've been told about the night of my birth, when a flood leveled the city of Johnstown, a patchwork of story and surmise. On my 50th birthday, I've returned to see the lanterns lit along the stone bridge, to visit the ground where my ancestral home folded into itself like an envelope. I have come to visit the plot of the unknown drown at Grandview Cemetery and run my hand along the arc of every blank stone.